So a couple months after Endwalker came out, Misshapen Chair puts out a video lamenting how boring healing had become in his opinion in Final Fantasy XIV. And he was reminiscing back on Heaven's Word and Stormblood and how much more engaging that healing was in these expansions. But starting around Shadowbringers, Square Enix went ahead and they pruned the healing jobs, reducing their DPS rotation down to 2 buttons, maximum 3 buttons. And this is something that Misshapen Chair was annoyed about. And this is something that he thinks is a mistake. Now, more recently, come the current tier in patch 6.2, a lot of healers are actually having fun this tier, and a lot of healers are having fun doing this current raid tier and this current tier's extreme. Now, despite that being the case, there is still a camp of people, even today, who are adamant and who are enthusiastic about the premise of Square Enix going ahead and adding a more fleshed out DPS rotation and going back to the Stormblood days, to the Heavensward days, where healers had more to do in terms of their DPS. Now, why is that? Why is it that there are these two camps? One camp that thinks that healing is already fun as it is in the current tier, and a camp of people who think that it's boring. And fundamentally, what this boils down to is the fact that we are playing an MMO where current tiers exist, where there is an extreme, where there is a current savage tier, but there is also roulettes. And those are essentially the two camps and why you hear both these sentiments. There are people who are leveling and there are people who are running the high-end content. And the people who are currently running the high-end content, the healers who are currently running the high-end content are generally pretty happy, despite there being some problems with tanks and DPS not empathizing with healers right now. And, having to rise up and use mitigation that they weren't used to using in previous tiers. Despite that being the case, healers are still having fun. And the sentiment that healers need to have a more fleshed out DPS rotation is coming mostly from people who are running roulettes or lower end stuff. And it makes sense, rightfully so, if you're going through roulettes and you're leveling and, most people know what to do and you rarely have to heal at all. And your whole DPS rotation is 2 buttons, then it's going to get boring. I know because I just leveled Sage from level 70 to like 81, 82 right now. And I spammed roulettes doing it. And so I totally understand the sentiment. Now, does that mean that Square Enix should go ahead and add a more sophisticated DPS rotation? I'm skeptical to say that that's the move, because if Square Enix goes ahead and adds a more sophisticated DPS rotation, although it will make doing roulettes a bit more fun, it'll create a situation where doing the current raid tiers becomes nigh impossible, because healers already have to deal with making sure that people who are still learning how to mitigate for the first time properly, dealing with them, being topped off and dealing with the mechanics and, even having their current 2 to 3 DPS buttons they have to push, add a whole ass DPS rotation on top of that, it starts to become too much. So how do you solve this problem? Where roulettes are boring, where lower end content is boring because you're only pressing 1 or 2 buttons, because your tanks and your DPS don't need that much healing because they essentially know how to do these roulettes. And, while also making sure that you don't make the high-end stuff too difficult. What's there to do? Well, there are some current solutions that Square Enix have already implemented. One of those is just severely incentivizing doing your roulettes. When you do your daily roulettes, there's a shit ton of experience that you get for doing them. And Square Enix wants you to do them, so Sprouts have people to do it with. In addition to that, one solution that Square Enix currently has in the game for this is, monetization. You can buy a boost and you could skip that and go almost all the way to endgame content. And so these are the two current solutions that Square Enix has in the game to deal with this issue that, healing in the leveling process is not very engaging. Now, are those the best solutions we can come up with? I don't think so. One solution that Square Enix could technically implement, and I think would be a great incentive, is giving more reason for people to run leveling roulettes or run leveling trials, minimum eye level, and no echo. Is this a perfect solution? No, but I think it's a lot better than what we currently have. And one of the best incentives, I think, would be like a just shit ton of experience. If Square Enix went ahead and maybe made it on a daily timer like they have for the regular leveling roulettes, where you can go in And you could do trials, minimum eye level, no echo, for just a ton of experience, way more experience than you'd get running at normal. I think this would make leveling for healers more fun. You know, it would make it more fun, especially if they went ahead and they redesigned minimum eye level, no echo to make it more engaging and, you know, add different mechanics. Now, are they going to do it? I doubt that's something that Square Enix would consider, because then what I think that would do is it would eat into their sales for the boosts and the level boosts. And at the end of the day, Square Enix is a business, and they, you know, have an incentive to make leveling a bit more boring. So then you have an incentive to go ahead and buy the boosts. And so that's just kind of where we're at here. And that's kind of what happens with MMOs in general, you know, especially once your MMO starts introducing boosts. Now, the developer has a clear financial incentive to make leveling not engaging, because if it's not engaging, then you have more reason to go ahead and buy the boost. But that is something technically that could happen. Technically, they could go ahead and make mine stuff more engaging and incentivize mine stuff with more XP, and then people would go ahead and do it, and then you wouldn't have these two camps anymore. So ultimately, I think that Square Enix did eventually recognize what Misshapen Chair was saying back in 6.0, that healing had become a lot more boring than it was previously, and the way they dealt with that is creating a situation now where they're forcing DPS and tanks to mitigate in the current tier. And, you know, this is making healing more engaging for the healers because they have more things to worry about. And so they solved this problem for the current tier, but leveling is what it is. And that's all I had to say for this video. We'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.